crypto has, as an industry, has a very strong tendency to overpromise and underdeliver. And a lot of these foundations, very much new blockchain projects, especially the ones that really took off in 2020, 2021, they got a lot of money. They promised a lot of things, and many of them are yet to deliver on things that their investors would consider to be reasonably reaching what they expected from the hype that was around those projects. So I think there's a lot of work there.
Welcome to Beyond the Beat, a podcast by Chain Story, the agency to elevate your status in crypto. I'm your host, Pedro, and every week we'll be talking to the people in crypto media. We'll be telling their stories, their failures, their lessons, and whatever tips or tricks they've got up their sleeves.
Hello. Welcome to another episode of Beyond the Beat. Excited to chat today to Tom Mitchelhill, Cointelegraph, who's phoning us from down under. I think it's like 10 p.m. or something like that in Melbourne. How's it going, Tom? Thanks for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. Yeah, a little after 10, but I'm very much awake. Like I'm wide awake this evening, so we're good.
You sound surprised.
Usually I kind of peter off around this time, but I think I'm excited. So yeah, levels are up. We're good.
Nice, man. Let's make it happen. So I know who you are. I'm sure that some of my listeners know who you are. But do you want to tell those of us, or those that are listening or watching, who's Tom?
Ooh, big question.
Yeah, straight into the deep end, man.
I'm not too great about talking about myself. That's a bad way to start a podcast, but I'll give it my best shot. So I've been working in crypto full time since 2021. I got into crypto originally in 2019. There's a bit of a backstory as to how I got into it properly, but I'll stick with the journalism side of things for now. Just started getting very, very interested in crypto in late 2020. I had friends in 2019 that were super into it, like annoyingly into it. And they were always trying to like drag me along to like crypto conferences, and I was like, I don't care about this Bitcoin.
They actually wanted to take you to crypto conferences, not even talk about it, just like straight to the conference.
Literally, they were trying to like drag me to like crypto meetups that were happening at the university, and I was like, I could not think of anything that I would not want to do with my time for. So I was like, no, you guys do that. And then a couple of my friends were working at crypto trading desks. I was just getting into like investing from a more financial side along with them, and I was considering whether or not to head into the financial side following uni. And a lot of stuff happened. So we'll just start with background. So I studied law and journalism for a year and a half at university originally. I then
it's a unique combo.
Yeah. So I then proceeded to drop out of that course, much to my parents' dismay, and I studied philosophy and economics instead. So that's where I went. I started a removals company alongside that at university. I've always had a kind of like a penchant for a bit of manual labor. Like I enjoy repetitive physical movements, so that worked.
I feel like that's a very Australian thing now.
Yeah, I don't know what it is, where like the inner blue collar comes from, but it's there. So I did that. I grew it while I was studying at university, and then COVID hit, and I just started kind of writing these long essays, much more from like a more economics philosophy perspective on crypto. Funnily enough, when I first came across and started getting interested in crypto from an investment point of view, I was very skeptical of it. I was like, why is this worth anything at all? What are people doing with it? I blame a lot of my initial skepticism on like laser-eyed Bitcoin maxis that were very like aggressively like you have to own Bitcoin, you have to, if you don't own it, like have fun staying poor. And I was like, oh no, like I don't know what these guys are doing.
Definitely not a welcoming place, hey.
No, it was a terrible onboarding experience.
Yeah.
But I met some interesting people and I kind of stuck around. And so COVID hit. I'd been getting more interested in it, just as a field, largely from an investment side, and then just from like what's happening here. There's people building public money on the internet. This is fascinating. Sorting through all of the different things. That was probably the time where I feel like there was more of a sense of potential in crypto, of like all these new things are coming to market. They have absurd valuations. What's going on? So I sold my removals company as COVID hit because of lockdowns and I could no longer operate it, which was actually a blessing in disguise, because the prices for like secondhand vehicles went way up. And so I was like, beautiful, let's go. And then, yeah, I came across Cointelegraph and I was lucky to have a very, very good editor at the time that really, really whipped me into shape and stopped me from writing 5,000 word essays and was like, let's do proper
words.
Reporting.
Yeah.
Some of them were hefty. I still do it, but I release it under my own name. Yeah. So yeah, it's kind of like a rough around the edges story as to how I got into it. I was just literally sitting inside during COVID, and I was like, well, I have some like reporting background. Like I have a vague idea of what I'm doing, and I was just fascinated to write about it and to report on it because I found that the best way to understand the industry was to do stuff in it, to mess around with DeFi protocols, to buy the shit coins, and then to essentially write about it. And that's kind of what shoehorned me into the reporting side.
And what shoehorned you into because you said that you had another backdrop to crypto.
Yeah, so there was that backdrop to crypto. Yeah, sorry, how do you mean?
Like you said that you wanted to start off just saying about the reporting side of things and how you got into that, but then you had another sort of entry into crypto or something that maybe, yeah, that there was something else that dragged you into the space, but maybe we already covered it. And
no, absolutely. Yeah, so that initial entry point was one of it was a mix of like intense skepticism and intense optimism at the same time. Like whenever I'm looking at these kind of things, I want to try and figure out how, I essentially could be right in my thinking and how I could be wrong in my thinking around what this industry is and what it represents. And I would say like I kind of swung between the two, and I have a lot of time and respect for the work that the guys do over at Protos. Like Piancey and Bennett Tomlin. I really like those guys' work. Their stuff.
It's funny. They're actually, I'd say, beyond the Defiant. I'd say, because obviously biased, but yeah, I'd say Protos is my favorite. I had Cass on the podcast a couple months ago, and yeah, he's brilliant. And the stories that they put through and the stuff that they do is just brilliant.
Yeah.
So yeah, well, shout out to Cass.
They got me very interested in the more reporting side, because I was like, whoa, there's a lot of stuff going on here. A lot of stuff isn't fantastic. So yeah, it's interesting walking that kind of line between having like a pro crypto view. Like I do like the idea of where this industry is headed. And I really, I'm enthralled by the idea of the fact that there's, tens of thousands of people building like a new era of public money on the internet. That's intriguing on its own. And then also having that balance of like, well, there's a lot of stuff going on here that isn't brilliant either. So no, it's good.
Do you still think that crypto has that potential that you saw in the early days, or after all this reporting that you've done and after speaking to everybody, buying the shit coins, trying out the protocols, that sort of idealism or that view of what this could be is still intact, or has it fallen off a cliff or just like dropped a little bit, or is it even stronger, like conviction is at max levels?
This is interesting because I fluctuate on this. Not much. I would say that I hold, funnily enough, a stronger pro crypto viewpoint now than I did back then. I think I have a better understanding of what this industry is capable of and what it can do. I think that once I realized that, and I think Brian Armstrong said this in a tweet quite recently, talking about how trading was the best business for crypto. Like, the speculation is very much a feature, not a bug. I think that took me a while to wrap my head around, because I'm like, well, what are we trading? Like, what are we?
What do you mean?
What's everyone buying and selling? Like, what are we talking about? But I do think that that's quite interesting from a financial perspective, in the sense that crypto is one of the softest or most inefficient markets in the world, in the sense that everyone is trying to figure out what the fair value of these assets are in real time. And that's a very, very interesting side of it that I really like. Like, I like the value perspective of what's going on here. But then, yeah, it's just, I don't know, like, crypto from a reporting side is like it's like an ADHD person's dream. You know, like, there are so many different, like, facets that you can take this. There are, there's DeFi. You can, like, 2022 through 2023, most crypto reporters became court reporters. Like, it was, it was all of the legal cases of Celsius, BlockFi, FTX. And so you're digging through court records. And then the next day, you're essentially functioning as a tech reporter, and you're looking at startups and raises and, speaking with VCs. So it's this really broad spectrum role where you get to interact with all of these things that you wouldn't do if you're in a more niche area of reporting. And I don't think I could do reporting anywhere else, simply because I like that general spread of stuff that's just constantly going on. So, yeah.
Do you have like a specific beat in the crypto space that you particularly like reporting on? Like, you cover a lot from what I've seen on your articles, but is there any specific one that you think to yourself that you usually pitch, or that you usually don't, or that you really like, and it's like, this is what I'd like to be writing about more often?
It pains me to say it, but yeah, I would say that overall, I'm much more of a generalist, in that I like having different topics to write about. Like, it keeps me on my toes. It's forced me to go and figure out what these things are, because I prefer not to report on things that I don't like have some kind of physical grasp on. Like, often I'll report on things and then I'll go mess around. Like, when I started looking into DeFi in 2022, I was like, wait, and I just went and just played around with different DeFi protocols. I like having that backdrop of understanding what's occurring in markets. When people talk about it to me, I can be like, okay, cool. Like, I have a vague sense. At the moment, I would say that meme coins are probably my favorite thing to report on and to write about. I think that Ryan Gladwin from Decrypt is doing an incredible job. He has been killing it. Like, he's been coming up with the leads. He's been reporting on all the crack.
Yeah, shout out to Ryan for sure.
I find that really, really, like, great that he's like taken that beat and he's run with it, because it's insane. But yeah, I would say that meme coins are, yeah.
Yeah, there's a bit of a discussion happening on one of the most recent articles that he put out about, like, this crackhead dev, the guy that's like missing a tooth. And it's like, why are we reporting on this? What have we done wrong? Like, what is this? And I actually think it's really interesting. Well, I think it responds to what the audience wants to read and find out about. And I think it just responds really well to, like, a big part of the current crypto culture, that more degen side, and the just weirdness of the industry that we work in.
Yep. No, totally agree. I think it's a healthy response to look at that and go, like, kind of just be like, what the fuck is going on? Like, what are we doing? What's going on? Like, that's a fair take, but it is happening. And I'm glad that someone's like reporting on it. Obviously with meme coins, you have the issue of, like, just kind of pointless speculation, covering incredibly volatile assets. So there's conundrums with it, but I think that on the whole, I think that they're fortunately and unfortunately, again, speculation is a feature, not a bug in crypto. So I think it's a good thing that there's coverage on it. And yeah.
I want to ask you about like coverage, like geographical coverage. So I'm in Latin America, but the majority of our readers at the Defiant are in the US, and it's a very US centric industry, which is kind of paradoxical because we're always talking about decentralization and like distributed systems and like all this sort of stuff. And then we end up catering to the US crowd and to like a small degree, I suppose, to Europe. But you're in Australia and Asia Pacific and covering that region. Like, what's going on there? Because I'll admit that I'm not entirely sure. I mean, I know there is stuff going on, and I know like people ask me the same question, like, so what's going on in Latin America? And it's like, you'd be surprised, like all the interesting projects, the amount of developers, the amount of art that's coming out. But yeah, how come? Yeah, what's going on in Asia Pacific, and what do you think we need to do, like as a journalist or as media, to sort of shine a light on these sort of regions that usually get tucked under the rug or that are just like satellites to what's going on in the US?
Yeah. Well, the lion's share of attention goes to the US because that's where all like, the quote unquote big stuff is occurring. Like the major industry developments, like all of like the crypto market is literally sitting, waiting for the presidency and political kind of just a political shift. Everyone's just like, hanging on that at the moment. Of everything's based on US policy in terms of how crypto proceeds. But in Australia, clearly there's less going on in terms of like orders of magnitude of information. But I do think that there's still a lot of really interesting, products and things coming out of the Oz scene as well. In Australia, there's a really good, shout out to the guys at Stables. They do a fantastic like USDC payment rails thing down here. It's probably one of the better like consumer apps that I've seen come out in terms of stablecoin payments. But yeah, in terms of getting coverage to projects in the Asia Pacific, I feel like Asia Pacific has not necessarily stagnated in terms of crypto development, but there's not as much going on. Like we've seen a lot of stuff. I would say there was a lot of optimism and hope for things in Hong Kong. But the Hong Kong crypto scene has kind of just not much has happened there.
Right.
One of the guys on my team is looking into the institutional side over there. Like I went over to Hong Kong FinTech Week last year in September, October, and there was a lot of this like, we're gonna do all these things and we're gonna like, it was very like hyped up. But I do remember coming back and feeling like this feels like a lot of like a lot of lip service to institutional adoption in Hong Kong. So I'm not 100% sure as to what's happening over there. Obviously Singapore is a huge region with a lot of stuff happening in terms of crypto there. But yeah, in terms of Australia and getting, coverage to it, pitch me some leads if anyone's listening and they have some things that they're doing in Australia. Let's go. But yeah, I think there's a very, very good crypto scene here in Melbourne as well, down at Upside.
Is there?
Yeah, no, there's a very, very strong crypto culture down here. It's very small. Like relative to the US, again, it's very, very small. But there's a really good startup incubator here in Melbourne called Upside, and they have a lot of like really interesting projects that are coming out of there. And no, it gives me a lot of optimism for what Australia can do. But yeah,
interesting. Yeah, it's funny how I've always been intrigued by it, like this idea, and especially like now I'm in Argentina and there's a lot happening here, and like authorities are on board, the government is on, like different areas of government is on board. And it's just like, I don't think I've seen any reporting on it whatsoever. And it's like you say, everybody is just focused on, is Trump going to get elected? Is Kamala going to get elected? And what's going to happen there? And I don't know, it feels like it's been co-opted so bad. Like I was at Bitcoin 2024 and it was just such a bizarre moment to like run into my maxi cypherpunk friends and then standing next to a guy in a MAGA hat being like, so what time does Trump come on? Like, and I was just like, am I at a Bitcoin conference still? Like, is that actually, is this the kind of stuff that we've sort of evolved into?
Yeah. It is crazy how like crypto has become, a very, very small election issue, but it's huge to us, like in crypto. I do think that crypto people overestimate the importance of crypto in this election. It's like, Kamala has to come up with a crypto policy. It's like, 99% of well-adjusted people don't mind what Kamala's policy on crypto is. But with that said, it's interesting how quickly this became politicized. It used to be such a fringe, subculture almost of like, crypto, NFTs, and now you've got Trump doing his 4th NFT collection and calling himself the crypto president. I'm like, whoa, yeah. I will just say on the Australia topic, particularly like from the regulation side, it's stuff that I've looked into quite a bit, and it's something I'd like to do more reporting on. But the regulation down here is just slow because they're watching the US. And I feel like a lot of other countries from a regulatory side anyway, and it's impeding the growth of it's impeding the movement of a lot of startups that are trying to develop and trying to do things down under, because the Australian government, they've got the Treasury, I feel, on board with some okay crypto legislation. It's not necessarily friendly, but it's not necessarily negative either. It's much more looking at it like it's fintech, and they're kind of like, okay, we'll try and regulate it like that, and that's what they're pushing for. But it is, I think, that everyone's just waiting and watching, just like the media is. The regulators are also looking to America and being like, what are you guys going to do? And then we'll follow suit.
And do you have like some sort of lobbying or some sort of group that's like pushing regulators, meeting up with regulators, or is everything just like, or are regulators just like waiting and not really talking to many people and just sort of on the sideline for now?
We have pretty solid policy engagement here in Australia. Like we have the Blockchain Association. I've forgotten it, rebranded last year sometime. I can't recall the name of the organization off the top of my head, but it's run by a guy called Steve Vallis, who's the former president of the Australian Blockchain Association. And he's constantly having chats with Treasury, and so are a lot of the people from the Australian Blockchain Association. Like it's one of the bigger policy groups here, and they seem to have a very, very good relationship with Treasury and with the financial regulator ASIC. It's just there's not much political motivation in Australia to push crypto laws. Like we have one senator from the Liberal Party, which is like Australia's Republicans, kind of. It's the conservative side, who's extremely pro-crypto, but he's among a very small handful of policymakers that are really throwing their weight behind crypto in Australia. So yeah, and obviously you've got the centralized exchanges that are pushing for stuff to happen here as well. So yeah,
I want to go back to media, and I wanted to ask you something that I've been thinking about increasingly, which is, and it goes back to the question I asked you before about what sort of things that you're most interested in when you're doing your reporting. And it's this idea of having and I was talking about this yesterday, having like beat specific reporters in every single crypto outlet. And so you've got policy reporters, then you've got DeFi reporters, then you've got investigative reporters, and then something that's popped up recently is Bitcoin reporters. So I know Laura Shin at Unchained I don't know if she's still looking for a Bitcoin focused reporter, a Bitcoin only reporter. Kami at the Defiant says I'm the de facto Bitcoin reporter. But what do you think of this idea of having a specific person to work on Bitcoin or to have that specific niche or that specific vertical and have someone dedicated just to that ecosystem?
I think from a publication perspective, it makes a lot of sense. It also just depends if reporters are happy doing that. As I wouldn't mind narrowing down on a niche and really getting into it, but I don't know how long I could do it for before I'd be I gotta go do something else. That's just my nature. But I do feel it makes things a lot easier for, outlets to, just have someone who's like, okay, you're going to be focused on this. And it reduces the crossover spread between reporters that are like, oh, well, I wanted to do that, or oh, I'm looking at this. And you kind of have, this mix up with, crossover. I do think that it's good that, and this is just me speaking, but being kind of forced to be a generalist from the outset was really, really good. And I think that that's an experience that, it's probably healthier for new reporters to have. Like, I'm saying this as like a reporter who's only been doing it for 3-ish years full time. So I'm by no means like the jury's not out on this. So this is my own perspective. I would say, like I'm not Laura Shin, as you can tell. And so I think that as just like a general kind of entry point, I think it's good for new reporters to be able to go out and explore and find what they really, really like. And then if they want to narrow it down, that's fantastic. From the publication, like efficiency side, I think it's fantastic. Like just having someone that you're like, okay, you're just going to focus on this area. Because there is so much stuff that happens in crypto that it's like, if you just have kind of people spread out looking across for leads and finding things and bringing them up, you can get a bit of crossover. You can get a bit of like dilution. It just wouldn't be nearly as efficient as it would be to have like, hey, this is your beat, kill it.
Would it make sense though to like divide that up by ecosystem? So to have like a Bitcoin reporter, an Ethereum reporter, Solana reporter, and like I guess meme coin reporter or whatever it is, or would it just be like umbrella? So anything that happens with regulation that has to do with Bitcoin or anything that has to do with meme coins across ecosystems. But yeah, how do you view that? Or do you just consider it as just like that umbrella that makes more sense?
I would say the umbrella would make the most sense, because if you start narrowing down too much, you're going to run out of stuff to do. I mean, being a Bitcoin reporter, that's a hell of a vertical. You've got stuff for years. Like, keep going. But I feel like if you started getting into like the Solana reporter, oh, you're going to be the Proto reporter, you're going to be the Cardano reporter, you're going to run out of stuff.
As soon as they give you the beat, you're going to run out of stuff.
Shit, I'm not dunking on Cardano or Polkadot publicly, but I do think that a general, kind of like a loosely held umbrella would be the ideal way to approach it, because then you have that freedom as a reporter to be like, okay, cool, like I want to do stuff with this ecosystem. Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, they could all be verticals. Even with Solana, like I feel as though they just wouldn't be. And sorry, Matt, if you hear this, but there's just probably not enough in the ecosystem to do a Solana vertical right now, unless you included meme coins in there, in which case there is. But it's that kind of thing where it's like the further you would go down in that on ecosystems, you would just kind of run out of stuff. So I think that like an Ethereum vertical, Jesus, like you'd be sweet. Like you've got 70% of the things that go on in crypto. Like you're good. But yeah, if you kept going down, you would end up being like, okay. So yeah.
What do you think about like investigative journalism? So we talked about Protos in the beginning, or a little bit earlier, and I think that that's like a sort of pervasive thought across a lot of the journalists and editors that I speak to, that we need more investigative journalism. But at the same time, there's the lack of resources. There's how do you actually do it? There's people who like, how do you actually get into investigative journalism? I think that requires its own special, I'm not going to say preparation, but like you do need to have that sort of specific mindset to be able to dig through things, to be able to put in the legwork for weeks and months in advance and that sort of stuff. Did you ever consider going down that route? Is that something? Because I mean, if you're writing 5,000 word essays or articles, at least you have it in you to write or to just like really put in the time to like flesh these things out.
Yeah, it's something that, and this has always interested me, because I feel like a lot of people have this idea of journalism as like, they think of a journalist and they think of like, oh yeah, like, holding the man accountable. It is like a lot of people, I think, that instinctively think of journalism as something that fundamentally is, like a hyper investigative role. You're going in, you're, servicing the Panama Papers, you're that person. But I think I think that like true investigative journalism, it requires, a special kind of person. And I think a lot of reporters would not be up for it. I think myself included, like it's something I'm definitely interested in, and I've definitely leaned that way before, and it's stuff that I've released like on my own time. Like, I did some, looking into certain companies, and I still have some things that I'm gonna release. Like, it's kind of dangerous, but like not dangerous. It's making it sound like I'm exposing someone. It's not. It's not all too dangerous, but
are you gonna drop a scoop on us right now?
There's some things that I'm like, that do, especially in crypto, like that do concern me, and I think that need to be brought up. And it's interesting
like what?
because
do you have any things front of mind that concern you?
More just how blockchain foundations use their funds long term. And I think this is something that I've been very interested in. Is crypto has, as an industry, has a very strong tendency to overpromise and underdeliver. And a lot of these foundations, very much new blockchain projects, especially the ones that really took off in 2020, 2021, they got a lot of money. They promised a lot of things, and many of them are yet to deliver on things that their investors would consider to be reasonably reaching what they expected from the hype that was around those projects. So I think there's a lot of work there. Everything in crypto exists on the almost like, and just like it would in Silicon Valley, everything kind of exists on this almost potential grift spectrum. Because when you have people that come in, there are lots of people with very noble ideals. They want to do the right thing. They actually have an idea. And I think that, projects kind of sit on this spectrum of being like, okay, well, some of these people came in with really, really genuine ideals of what they wanted to do. And, just either got too much money or they couldn't deliver on it. And the enthusiasm just petered out over time. Now they just kind of like peddle scientific papers and being like, oh, well, look, we've published a new thesis on how we can do certain kinds of proofs on this network. And it's like, it gets $3,000 of volume a day. Who cares? Like, what are we doing? So it's like, what's going on here? And I do feel like it's one of those brutal things that for a lot of these older blockchain networks, essentially everything that sits out of Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, many of them sit on this like kind of spectrum of like, how long will it take for the people that invested in them to realize that they've not necessarily been duped, but a lot of these things aren't going to do what they said they were in the outset. And so I think that's something that I'm quite interested in. From speaking from an investigative journalism side, I think we've got some incredible reporters in crypto that do a very good job, and I do think there could be a lot more in the way of investigative reporting. But I think it's a very, very challenging field to go into. And yeah, again, like in terms of education, of like how would you be trained? Like I would want to go to someone that has an investigative background. I would want to go to someone that can teach me, how to vet these sources, how to surface this information without either getting myself sued into oblivion, or just like ending up bankrupted and done. So no, it's a very interesting question.
Do you like going on the idea of the things that concern you in crypto, which I fully agree with? Do you think that the media is like a bit complicit in that, and that we've become a little bit too just like we're just trade publications that are a bit too self-serving? And maybe that's why something like Protos catches our eye, because it sort of flips that, and it's like, nah, there is dodgy shit that's happening, and we're going to report on it, and we're going to do that sort of hidden side, or the side of things that people don't really want to talk about. I know that there are publications, and I've put out a couple articles that have like sometimes asked a few hard-hitting questions, or just like tried to get to the other side of things. But then at the same time, I've always thought that the media industry in crypto is very like media industry. Like we're part of the industry rather than reporting or doing something or doing more like, trying to hold people accountable, or I don't know, like even I don't know. I'm sure that you run across it as well when you're chatting to sources and you ask it like a hard question and they sort of stare at you like, isn't this meant to be some sort of like fluff piece, or like what is going on here? So do you think that the media industry,
what's going on here? Yeah.
Yeah.
Wait, what? Yeah.
I mean, the amount of times that I've had to sit in like interviewing or like talking to a founder, and the PR person is sitting there like they're actually in the like quote unquote room, like in the call with you, just so that the other person doesn't screw up and say something they shouldn't. It's like, what do you mean? Or when you get asked to like send the questions ahead of time, like, can you send through a couple questions ahead of time? It's like,
no,
who does that?
Absolutely not. No, those kind of things. Listen, I think that, and it's difficult because, okay, so my thinking on it is that, a lot of the crypto publications are, aligned with the ethos of crypto. I also think that a lot of these publications do incredibly good work. Like, I mean, look at Ian Allison with FTX. Like, that's incredible. Like, CoinDesk is, crypto aligned. And I remember David Morris wrote like a really fantastic column on, like, should crypto journalists own crypto? And it was talking about this like ethical conundrum that, crypto reporters are kind of in, not just from an owning the assets perspective. And that's something we can get into, because I'm I invest in a lot of things in crypto and I also cover it, and it's balancing that thing of like, okay, well, I have a blog where I fully disclose what I own. So I'm like, I'm incredibly transparent with what I have. I don't go near anything that I think would be, would skew my reporting. And then for larger assets like Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, A, I'm not moving the needle. B, I believe that I have the integrity that I'm not going to let the fact that I have, a little bit of these assets fundamentally shift my reporting. But back to the question at hand. I think that it's hard to tell, because I'm like, I feel like a fish doesn't know water when it's swimming in it. But it's like,
that's a great analogy or parable or whatever it is, but that's a great one. Yeah.
It's difficult to know when you're like so up close to it. But I do feel as though the crypto publications that, even though like, despite being crypto aligned, there are very, very good standards and ethics in crypto reporting across the board. Like, most reporters that I meet have a healthy skepticism. They go into interviews being like, come on, man. Like, I meet very few, moon boys that are just here to be like, oh, sweet, cool, let's publish this stuff. Like, most journalists I know are kind of like, they have that allergic response to just like PR stuff. And it's like, well, like, let's tone that down a little bit, or let's like actually figure out what's going on here. And I think a lot of that is quite subtle. It's not stuff that's coming out being like, this blockchain is a fraud. Like, it's not these big nabby headlines, but it is in like it's the finer details in reporting that I feel like come through. And so I think that on the whole, there's room for improvement across the board, definitely. But on the whole, and this just might be like my own personal bias from the people, I associate with, the guys that work on my team at Cointelegraph are good at this. Like on the Asia Pacific news desk, like they're all guys that I very much respect and admire and have that healthy skepticism of what's going on. But in terms of crypto media being trade publications, I would say that there is, a concern that they skew that way. But I'd say that there's enough, solid reporting that comes out. Like the block with the internet computer article. I'm not sure if you... that was great. Like, it was just getting the founder to say in his own words what he thinks is going on. And just the way that was written, I was like, very well done. Like, there is a lot of really, really strong reporting that comes through, I feel, when it's necessary. So on the whole, I'd say, room for improvement across the board, as always. But on the whole, I think it's we're doing a good job.
Yeah, I agree. But and then I've always had that same question that you were saying, like the idea of, should crypto people hold crypto, and is that allowed? Because there's people in the industry that are like, nah, reporters shouldn't hold anything and they should be completely divorced financially from what they're reporting on. But I think it makes total sense. Like, if I write something on Bitcoin, I'm not going to move a needle at all. Like, not even the people that are reading it are going to look at it and be like, oh, then I have to sell or I have to buy more or anything like that. Like, it's going to be a completely insignificant, well, I hope not, at least, not a completely insignificant drop. Otherwise, what the fuck am I doing here? But it's like such a tiny, tiny sliver of the whole industry. And I do think that, like, to do the sort of reporting that we're doing, you need to get into it. You need to figure things out. Like, I'm a big fan of like the cultural side and what's called, not too fan of calling it the social layer, but I know that that's like the preferred nomenclature. But I do like, I think I like that side of things a lot more. And that's why I go to conferences and I go to meetups and I chat to people and I'm in the Telegram groups and the Discords, because like, similar to how people play around in DeFi, I chat to people, and that's the only way to actually get involved and to figure out what's going on, what's making people tick, why are they keep on coming back, why are they fighting, and doing all that sort of stuff, you know?
Yeah, no, dude, I completely agree. Like, I think that because there's the owning the asset side, and then there's being plugged into the community. The community, God, I hate the word like community, but it is. It's probably the best word for it. But yeah, it's a very, very interesting conundrum, and I understand people's, like, a lot of people, if you have a knee-jerk reaction to like, oh shit, the reporter owns the asset, like, what's going on? And I think that that's a fair initial reaction to have, of like, oh no, but like, wouldn't they be like skewed by owning it? And it's like, well, you know, crypto is very interesting in the sense that it's kind of like a blend of so many different industries all in the one place. And, you know, if I was, a financial reporter for a major outlet in America, like if I was a New York Times finance reporter and I owned the stock of, a company that I was writing some, like, huge report on, maybe I might be too close to it. Like, it's one of those things where I'm going to have severe editorial influence over the outcome of this thing. Like, I'm writing some new information, good or bad. You would be like, okay, there's an ethical conflict there, and a good editor would probably be like, listen, either, like, depends on the integrity of the reporter, but it does come down to, like, listen, you may be too close to this, and so we'll get someone else to do it, or sell a position, or whatever it is. But in crypto, I feel like it's one of these things where it's like, I'm not necessarily saying that, you have to go own every crypto asset ever to know about it. But I do think that if you're going to be in this space, if you're going to write about it, if you're going to report on it, it helps to know the subject material. And I prefer to learn by doing. And then you meet people that way. You are, interested in certain communities. It also depends on the size of the asset. Like, if it's a $12 million market cap thing, I will not be reporting on it if I own it. I will be like, nope. Like, it's too close. And even though, like, I'm completely transparent with what I own, I have like a weekly-ish, fortnightly newsletter where I literally will talk about like what I bought and sold.
Really?
Yeah. So I'm definitely one of the more degenerate journalists out there in the terms of, like,
and you evidence it.
What?
Lay it out.
I literally am like, full disclosure. So, like, I just find it really interesting, and I find the entire culture of it fascinating. Like, even just meme coins in general. Like, there are tens of thousands of people buying and owning assets they know are worthless, just endlessly. Like, that's interesting. Like, if you can call it stupid, you can call it like dumb or pointless or whatever, but I just find it fascinating that there are thousands of people doing this in real time. And no, I think that I think there's a benefit. Okay, sorry, slight tangent. I think there's a benefit to both sides. I think that it's important for, some reporting to be removed. Like, not owning any assets, choosing to be like, I'm not going near on. I'm going to be, separate from it. Fantastic. But I also do think there's a lot of room for people to be in the space, to be active in it, and to have that kind of like boots on ground, close up knowledge of what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I mean, I like it because you can also tell when when people, I mean, not always, but when people don't own the asset or aren't users, they do bring a fresh perspective that's much needed in a lot of the reporting that we're seeing. And then when you have the people that are like deep in the trenches, it also brings a lot of value because, okay, this is what's actually happening. This is what they're going through. This is what they're living. These are the conversations that they're having. You named the New York Times. What do you, I want to get your point of view on what you think about like just the traditional media sense. I hate calling it mainstream media. I tend to call it like conventional media because I think that the mainstream, if there is a mainstream, like I know we'd have to define it, is
we're the
not
hipster
really
media. So
yeah. Yeah. But what do you think of it? Like, do you think that it's in dire straits? I know there's this idea, like that cliche, media is always 5 years from dying or whatever you want. But yeah, how do you sort of view the just outside of crypto, the general media situation?
This is
a small question.
It's what do you? Yeah, it is a big question. But from there's just so many different like areas at which you could narrow in on this. I would say that I'm concerned by the almost like ideological capture and kind of like echo chamber quality of traditional media and the way that like, political essentially like ideology has just been like captured into certain points, and like the fact that we have to have separate tools to analyze media bias in how things are reported come through. Like I was never drawn to crypto as like a destroy all banks kind of guy. I'm not really. I sit probably like center left politically. That probably comes as a surprise to a lot of people, but it's like, wow, the guy in crypto.
People are shocked to hear that there's center left people in crypto.
Whoa, yeah, he's a fan of high trust societies and government policy. Anyway, reasonable,
and social cohesion and like some sort of collective action.
Terrible,
shocker.
And so it's like, I'm not trying to just like do that to like self-identify and be like, I'm center left, I'm one of the good guys. But it just does concern me how like, increasingly tribal the media landscape has become. In terms of it dying, I do think that it's interesting because it's like, whoa, shit, I don't know many Gen Zers that do much in the way of reading. I don't know many young people that are like even just picking up books or going to a newspaper digitally or otherwise for information too much. Like my younger brother, he's pretty like I don't know what his like news diet would look like, but I imagine not much of it would. He's not picking up Wall Street Journal, so he's 18 years old. Sorry, he just turned 20. Oh, whoa, now I'm old. But I think
we can
the
edit
younger
that
generation. Yeah, well, edit clip that. I do think that the younger generation are not going to be reading news articles. So that is a concerning trend from the perspective of like, you extrapolate this out on a long enough time horizon. Who's going to be reading? Don't know. But from a general perspective of like, do I think it's dying? I think it's changing. I have my own personal opinion is that reading things is probably like a better medium for consuming a lot of news. I have a lot of respect for just the written word in general, so that's my own bias, clearly. So yeah, sorry, I'm not really answering the question too well.
No, it's fine. I mean, I totally like. I see sort of the same trend happening, and I think that it's accelerating at the moment, especially with like social media, and like COVID definitely accelerated that trend. Yep. And I'm low key frightened because, and this is also like a slight tangent. I don't know if you've read the book Stolen Focus by Johann Hari, or maybe you've never heard of it.
No, but it rings bells. Yeah.
It's a brilliant, like he sort of lays out how we've got this huge attention, like there's a crisis of concentration and crisis of attention, and how we can't simply like concentrate even on a 50-minute conversation or like a 3-minute article or anything like that. And obviously he names like a bunch of different things. It's not just internet and social media, but it's also our diets. It's also the lack of exercise. It's also the lack of like community building activities, air pollution, all that sort of stuff. It's a brilliant book. Like I read it and it just got destroyed with notes. And then my friends and family got destroyed with like recommendations like, you have to read this now. Please read this now. But yeah, it's and that trend is only accelerating. And I think that and I think that that's like where we're heading, or we're heading to this sort of like place in the world. And I see this as a journalist who, and I'm sure you see it as well, where we write out articles and like the average reading time is 30 seconds, 32 seconds. Like people are just skimming through it. And like you're trying to find the sound bites, or you're just reading the headline and things like that. And so I wonder to myself as well where the written word is going, like what media is going to turn into. Are we going to turn into this like super fragmented, just TikTok independent journalism? Or I think there's always going to be a space for the Wall Street Journals of the world, the Cointelegraphs, the Defiance, the New York Times. But I think it's going to get increasingly narrow. And at the same time, I don't know what that's going to mean to the discourse on all the things that are happening around the world. Like once again, I'm like slightly concerned about how that's going to negatively affect how we make decisions, how we interact with each other, what are the things, like how we prioritize things as just individuals, families, collectives, and so on.
Okay, that's actually really good. That's jogged me into like kind of what I wanted to say before, but got lost. My biggest my biggest concern isn't necessarily with like the death of, conventional or traditional media. I think that they will manage to stick around. There will always be, a market for, journalism to some degree. Like people need to know what's going on. Reporters will always exist. AI is probably not taking jobs like at a scale that I think that people were terrified by. But what does worry me again is like I touched on it briefly before, but it's the level to which people can like procure their own information. And I think that the kind of renaissance that we're seeing with Substack is a very, very good indicator of like, no, people do want long form written content, but I feel like a lot of people are mistrusting of certain media sources because they don't know, how the bias is being hidden in their news. They're like, well, shit, like, am I getting the whole picture from the New York Times? Or like, and I feel like a lot of people are more, maybe this is overestimating, but like, I feel like many people are quite media literate. They understand that they're getting right-wing things from Fox. They understand that they're getting, more center-left leaning things from the New York Times. But
that's a great point.
Yeah.
There's I don't know if you saw, I'm sure you saw it last week, that story from the Washington Reporter that got tossed around that said like Senate sources say that, I think it was Kamala had something it was going to name Gary Gensler's like Secretary of Treasury. And
everyone
like
went,
there were
what?
And several like crypto publications ran with the story. And I think it was Jeff Roberts from Forbes, or is it Fortune? Sorry, Jeff. But he was saying like the amount of media illiteracy, even within the media, is shocking.
Yep. Never mind. I retract my comment about everyone being media literate. I said that, and then as it came out, I was like, wait a second, no, most people aren't really aware of where they're getting their shit from.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Like, in fact, I actually heard you say media illiterate. That's why I ran with my point. So
okay,
yeah,
cool.
At least
Yeah. Well, that would be like my biggest concern is this lack of a shared narrative that people can go to for like this collective, sense of truth. And this is the problem with media today. This is like the big issue that I see is there's no agreed upon source of, information that everyone can look to and go, okay, cool, this is what happened. Because everyone's like, well, no, that's fake news because in my article it said this. It's the same event. But it's like, oh, no, no, no. Well, in the thing that I read, it said this. And you constantly have this bickering, and no one can ever really agree on what actually happened. And so no one actually talks to each other. Everyone's just kind of talking past one another. And I think, Substack can help with that because it can raise up individual voices. But I'm kind of cautious of these solutions that require, individual things to pop up and solve stuff. Because it's like, well, it's not really the job of one person to then come in and be like, well, I'm going to be the reasonable point of view on all this. Because it's like, well, where are their biases? But yeah, I think that's my main concern is this idea of like, living in a post-truth era where no one can agree on what has actually happened when something happens. Everyone has like a slightly different take on it and just and that just then also is just kind of like a virtuous cycle of polarization. So yeah.
So we're screwed, pretty much, because it only feels like it's spiraling out of control, and you have these sort of, because then you also have the concern of things like what's happening with the CEO of Telegram, like Pavel Durov, who got arrested for not censoring on his platform, among other things. But it's like, so then you have who you don't really know who the sources are, what you're reading, what's truthful and what's not truthful. And then you have the government, which is saying, no, there's now state sanctioned information, and that everything else is like potentially misinformation or likely information. Like Mark Zuckerberg, he came out and he was saying that he publicly apologized for acquiescing to what the government told him, which I actually think is like slightly off. I mean, it's very convenient for him to come out and publicly say that right now.
Mark Zuckerberg is one of my least favorite people. And I know he's got the cool, and this is the thing, I do MMA and I do jiu-jitsu, and he's very much appealed to a lot of the UFC crowd by being like, look, I do jiu-jitsu and I'm like 10 and jack now. And I'm like, I don't. I have very little time for that guy for too many reasons to go into on the podcast. But
Yeah, I also supremely dislike him, and I find his whole rebranding super off-putting. But yeah, so you have these state-sanctioned arbiters of the truth, and then you have individual independent journalists who are telling you this is not the truth, and then you have other people who are just there to just cause chaos and just toss in trolling and all that sort of stuff, and it's hard, and even myself, who I consider myself a reasonably good filter of information, and I have an information diet that I think is pretty balanced and pretty nuanced, and I grab stuff from Discord, and then I read I don't know, Caitlin Johnston or Johnstone. I the Unlimited Hangout with Whitney Webb, and then a lot of other things. But then at the same time, there's a part of me is you're still just reading what they're telling you to read. It's a very subtle nudge, but they're still the ones who are presenting information in a certain way. They still might claim they don't have a bias, but they still have an internal bias. You can say you're left leaning, but that immediately means that you might have some sort of subtle inclination in that direction, which isn't necessarily a bad way. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying that's the reality of things, and that's an additional factor to take into account when you're reading this kind of stuff and when you're researching information and when you're talking to people. It's just how things are.
The fact that you kind of have to read maybe 5 or 6 different news reports from multiple outlets to get the whole picture of okay, well, what are these people saying? What are these people saying? What are the people in the middle saying? Okay, what can we actually see as factual that isn't a leap here, that isn't a twist? And the fact that you have to go to all those different sources just to get, and then again, it's it's your own idea of the best idea of it. It's not even the perfect, it's always this kind of confuddling of information into one thing that you're yeah, well, I think that's a good picture. I've read my multiple sources, and I hope that's what's happened. So no, it is really interesting, and I'm not sure how we go back now. I feel the toothpaste is out of the tube with this, and I'm not sure that you can get it back in. And this is something that I kind of wanted to gripe on a little bit, is the kind of stuff that we see on Twitter more broadly, like the amplification of not necessarily fake news, but misinformation and how quickly that can spread. And it's often, taken from headlines of other reports and then kind of Chinese whispered inner Twitter spaces into something else that then becomes this new thing that you're like, wait, where did that even come from?
It's like this endless game of like the telephone.
Yeah, literally. Yeah. So no, it is. Yeah, it is a little concerning as to where we go or what we do, and I don't have any good answers for it. It is just one of those problems that you look at and you think, well, shit, how do we fix that? Like, how do you go? And there's a reasonable argument to be made that, even let's zoom back to the 50s and be like, oh, well, there's 4 major newspapers and you get that one on your door. You could almost argue equally on the opposite side that you're even more prone to misinformation because there's only a couple of sources. So like, you're getting what you're getting there. And then, but I think that the core issue comes back to this idea of trust. Of like, can we trust what we're reading? Can I actually trust that this has happened? And I think that back then, for better or for worse, there was that collective trust in, well, this is the information that's being presented, and it's a reliance on, journalistic standards. And I do think that in a lot of publications, for the most part, when it comes to news, those journalistic standards are upheld to a fairly reasonable degree. Counterintuitively to my previous bitching and moaning about there not being enough truth, I do think that journalistic standards and the stuff that goes into how, news reporting in particular comes out is actually fairly solid across a good breadth of more, center publications. And I think that kind of gets lost in the wave of like Elon-inspired citizen journalism of like, oh, well, anyone with a phone can be a journalist. And it's like, I think that's, there are upsides to that, but there are also equal and opposite downsides in that people that don't have a media background, I'm not trying to gatekeep, I'm not trying to like sound like I'm coming from an ivory tower, but people that don't have that thing of like, okay, well, have you verified that claim? They said it, but is it true? And that just gets lost once you throw it to the wolves. It's just like, okay, cool. Well, this person may have said this. And so, you just end up with even more spread of possible misinformation that hasn't really been vetted. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's why, I appreciate and I think that independent journalism is really needed. But I think that's one of like the great things about like newsrooms where you have multiple views on something that's actually getting reported on. So I'll come with a source or a couple sources, and then it'll get vetted by my editor who's like, does that make sense? Does that not? Can we go with them? Like because sometimes like journalists will report on something and they'll think it's sound source, but then they'll realize, like it's happened to me where it was actually somebody trolling me, and it wasn't me that caught it, but it was my editor who's like, oh, did you notice this? Or did you see that? And then, oh shit. Whereas if it doesn't have that sort of checks and balances, which mind you, and I'll say it again, like we need both sides or like the full 360. But yeah, there is a lot of value in having those checks and balances and that.
Absolutely. I think that people don't, like someone who's never been in a newsroom wouldn't know what goes on and how many like internal checks. And like, wait a second, is this exactly what they said? Like to the word. Like, wait, did they say it like this or did they say it like that? And you got to be like, okay, wait, let me go back through my notes. And like, you look through it and like a thing that you think was going to take 2 hours takes all day. And you're like, oh my God, I just worked like, but it is. It's like, it's those kind of things of like, no, this is a sensitive issue. And if we don't report it correctly, it's going to be misrepresenting information. It's going to come across. And so it's like, there is a lot of work. And I feel like people don't see that. They just think that, journalists are just a bunch of monkeys hitting typewriters and be like, "Dad, we report whatever we want. Donald Trump sucks," or Kamala Harris sucks. It's just like whatever the bias is. But I don't think it's that. It's never that simple. And it's like, yes, there are, plenty of times where, things slip through the cracks or, bad reporting is done or like misinformation just pops up or like something's misreported. So like clearly it happens. Very, very obvious and embarrassing examples when it does because it's on display. It's like, oh man. I remember in Australia quite recently, there was like a terrible like murder case, but one of the TV channels ran with the wrong name of the guy on national news, and this
That's
guy
amazing.
whose name it actually was he sued them for like some hideous sum of money. But it's like, yeah, I would hate it to have been in that newsroom on that day. Like, wait, who was the source? Like, oh god,
Oh my God, that's savage.
but it's like, those things do happen, and it's very, very embarrassing, and it calls into question like what goes on. But it's like, I do have, I have a lot of sympathy for reporters and the work they do, like a larger scale, because like a good many of them are just trying to report the facts as they see them the best they can. So yeah,
this is something that I actually talked about with Cass as well. It's like, and I appreciate, and I feel like going through, like, being a journalist in crypto, you get put to, like, it's such a high degree of scrutiny, which is great. Like, I wouldn't have it any other way. And I feel like we're getting forged in the depths of like crypto mortar. And so,
Yep.
like any other beat afterwards, you can come with such a degree of like being able to understand and vet sources and like do proper reporting and all that sort of stuff. But then at the same time, like, people forget that we also make mistakes, that journalism isn't exactly like 100% infallible. And I think as long as you own up to those errors and to those mistakes, it's all good. But just that it happens.
Yep.
But yeah, man, we just crushed an hour and over an hour. And I tend to finish off all these conversations asking two questions always. And they circle back to what you were saying about reading, because I'm a massive bookworm and I'm always interested in what my fellow journalists are reading. So yeah, if you want to tell us what book you're reading at the moment, and what book do you usually recommend, or have you been recommended lately? This can be within the crypto realm. This can be outside. It can be Harry Potter for all I know. But yeah, those are always the two questions that I end the conversations on.
Okay. So books, I am like, yeah, big. I'm probably the most ADHD reader on the planet. I will read, I'm not kidding, I'm like, dude, I will read 2 to 3 books at a time, kind of like on rotation, like as I go. Most of it is like, and this is the thing, I probably don't have any sexy, like, what am I reading at the moment? It's like, I go through phases where I let myself read fiction, and then I let myself read nonfiction. So last year, I had a fiction year. So I literally refused myself books that were nonfiction, that weren't like pressing to work or like really immediate things. But I went through this phase where I just read nonfiction for years, and I kind of got bored of reading as a result. So last year I read, like, one of the favorite things that I read was rereading Game of Thrones, and Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett. Like, that was immaculate. At the moment, I am reading 3 books on my rotation at the moment. I recently picked up again on the genealogy of morals by Nietzsche, which is one of my favorite philosophical texts.
A bit of light reading.
Very light reading, very easy. I'm also reading Freedom, A Disease Without Cure by Slavoj Žižek, who's fantastic. He's like one of my favorite zany philosophers. And then for like my investing side, I'm reading The Most Important Thing by Howard Marks. And then a book that I'd recommend everyone to read, this is just my own personal preference, but something I've recommended to my friends a lot recently, is The Evolution of Everything by Matt Ridley. And it's essentially a look at how natural selection has shaped kind of like the forces of essentially everything from cellular organisms all the way to money, all the way to culture. And he takes a very, very interesting kind of stance, and he uses this old Roman poet called Lucretius to do it. And it's very well written. It's very engaging. And it's probably one of the better nonfiction books that I've ever read. So that's my recommendation.
Brilliant, man. I'm excited to add it to my list.
Hey, here's a small library, dude. Off you go.
Yeah. You might need like an entire new furniture to be able to stack them in, but there you go. Something like an extra weekend.
I'm going to add a
activity.
second recommendation. But
Go for it, man.
Origins, this is, again, also light reading. Origins of Political Order by Francis Fukuyama. Brilliant. Similar thing of like expansive history of how, societies evolved from essentially small groups of people living in caves all the way to Denmark. And his main question is like, okay, why did Denmark become Denmark? And why is, the Democratic Republic of the Congo the way it is? Like, it started out the same. Where did they split? How did that happen? And it's just this great kind of walk through history. Highly recommend. So, yeah.
Brilliant. Tom, this has been fantastic, man. I really appreciate it. Sorry to keep you up so late.
No.
But yeah, man. Awesome stuff. And can't wait to chat again.
No worries. Thanks for letting me ramble for the last hour and 10 minutes. It was a pleasure.
For sure, man. Have a good one.
Will do, man.
Met the button and had some fun. Hey, drunk, you could go get Santa.